Thomas Jefferson was a founding father and one of the most significant figures in American history. Born April 13, 1743 in Shadwell, Virginia, he is responsible for much of America's early milestones, including the basis for the Democratic-Republican Party, drafting of the Declaration of Independence, limiting federal government powers, the Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark Expedition, and establishing the basis for much of modern-day American philosophy. His political career began in 1768 as he joined the Virginia House of Burgesses, then a member of the Second Continental Congress in 1775, governor of Virginia in 1779, minister to France in 1785, secretary of state in 1790, vice president in 1797, and president of 2 terms from 1801 to 1809. He died July 4, 1826 in Charlottesville, Virginia. Thomas Jefferson was born to Peter Jefferson and Jane Rudolph Walk. He had a very privileged upbringing, as Jane Walk was part of a wealthy family in Britain who were very influential in the U.S., owning a plantation in Virginia, and to Peter Jefferson, who was a planter, commander of a local militia, and a political actor. As such, he grew up in a very wealthy and well-respected family. While in Shadwell, he was taught at a Presbyterian school, being mentored by James Maury, a well-respected Anglican minister who taught Jefferson science, history, and classical philosophy. He also learned how to speak French, Greek, and Latin at the age of 9. Although things changed dramatically for Jefferson when his father passed away when he was 14 years old, leaving the plantation up to him. Although in order to continue his education, he was placed under the guardianship of his close family friends who ran his plantation, while he went to the College of Williams and Mary in Williamsburg, 1760. In college, his intellect was made apparent, and to his peers, he was known for studying 15 hours a day. He was a follower of Professor William Small, a man who inspired many ideas of the Scottish Enlightenment, and Virginian Judge George Wythe, who was also part of the Philadelphia Convention and the Continental Congress. The heavy influence that these two had on him can be made apparent through many of his political works in the years to come. In 1768, he was elected to join the legislative branch of state government at the age of 25 as a part of the House of Burgesses in Virginia. Through this, he was able to meet and align with Patrick Henry and George Washington, who shared many of his ideas and were also considered radical at the time by many. On the 1st of January 1772, Jefferson married the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner, Martha Wales Skelton, who gave birth to 6 kids, although unfortunately their relationship would only last for 10 years, as September 6, 1782, she would pass away. As a part of the Virginian House of Burgesses, he distinguished himself through a strong standpoint against British colonial rule. In 1774, he drafted a summary view of the rights of British America to guide Virginian delegates at the First Continental Congress. Although many viewed his ideas as radical, he was able to establish a name for himself through the success of his pamphlet in London, New York, and Philadelphia. Moreover, due to the success of the pamphlet, he was selected by the Second Continental Congress, along with Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Roger Sherman, to draft a Declaration of Independence. As the principal author of the document, he was able to draw inspiration from the Enlightenment through thinkers such as John Locke and Thomas Paine. Inspiration for the document can also be traced back to the Magna Carta from 1215, the Declaration of Abro of 1320, and arguably the English Declaration of Rights in 1683, proving how well read he was in the political sphere. In June 1, 1779, he was selected to be the governor of Virginia, winning by 2 ballots. In 1780, he was re-elected, although in this term, he moved the governor's palace to strategically avoid impending attack from the British and the Southern Indians. This action made him very unpopular to his contemporaries, and in the next election of 1781, he was voted out of office. After the war, Congress wanted to form economic ties with European nations. For example, they called upon the Dutch, who brought loans to help them cover the debt that they've collected through the American Revolution. Through this, they chose Thomas Jefferson to join Benjamin Franklin and John Adams in Paris as minister plenipotentiaries. A few months later, Jefferson was chosen to succeed Benjamin Franklin as minister to France. While in France, Jefferson was tasked with forming close ties to the country. He wrote a number of treaties that became significant milestones for the country, including the Treaty of Amity and Commerce between the Kingdom of Prussia and the U.S. Through this, America became and was recognized as equal trading partners by major European powers. He also formed a friendship with Marquis de Lafayette, a man who played a major role in America's victory against the British and would also play a major role in the French Revolution. In In fact, Jefferson supported the French Revolution, and on August 26, 1789, Lafayette would draft the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which drew heavy influence from the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson had written. Due to his efforts in France, George Washington awarded Jefferson with the position of Secretary of State on March 22, 1790. Then, in 1790, Jefferson would begin his political rivalry with Alexander Hamilton that began with a debate over financial affairs. Hamilton belonged to a group called the Federalists, who supported the idea of having a strong central power. He believed this was best for the country because he wanted to build an economy that was based on a system of capital production and encourage investment. He wanted industry to be facilitated by the production of raw goods. This opposed Jefferson's argument. He wanted to build a national economy that was based on agriculture, because he felt that agriculture was a foundation for a moral society. When Hamilton proposed the idea of a national bank, Jefferson and his anti-federalist group feared that by introducing this bill, centralized power would become imminent. In order to support the bill, Hamilton allowed the capital of the U.S. to be relocated to Georgetown, Virginia, which is currently known as Washington, D.C. Fears of a centralized government escalated until December of 1791, where Jefferson and his anti-federalists introduced the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, protecting basic freedoms from the unaccountable tyranny seen by Great Britain, which caused the American Revolution. When George Washington stepped down from power in 1797, Thomas Jefferson ran against John Adams, a Federalist, in the following election. Unfortunately, Adams won, and Thomas Jefferson became vice president under the Adams administration. However, in 1793, the French Republic and Great Britain entered into a war. During the war, the British ordered the US to cease trade with France, but Washington drafted a statement of neutrality. The French viewed this as an act of hostility, and once Adams assumed power, conflicts grew between the French and the Americans. The Adams administration became unpopular for a list of reasons. To begin with, military spending in the quasi-war caused taxes to rise. Second, the Alien and Sedition Act made Adams even more unpopular. In the following election, Adams struggled to gain support in his second term, coupled with personal attacks from competing newspapers, made the debates between Jefferson and Adams polarized. In the newspapers, Jefferson was seen as moral, while Adams was seen as tyrannical and foolish. In the election, the Democratic Republicans won by a substantial amount. However, Jefferson tied with another Democratic Republican, Aaron Burr, by 76 electoral votes. The vote was taken to Congress, where in the 35th round, with the help of Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson had won the election. During his presidency, Jefferson realized his vision of a weak central government by reducing federal spending and reducing the size of the Army and Navy. This, in turn, helped cut national debt by a quarter in 2 years. He also eliminated domestic taxes, which allowed taxes on imports to be the only revenue that the government collected. He also focused more on improving agricultural policy and promoted the territorial expansion for agriculture. Although he strongly believed in a weak central government with limited federal powers, this idea was challenged by the Louisiana Purchase. In 1682, the Louisiana Territory belonged to the French, although they were forced to surrender parts of the territory to Spain due to a treaty. In the 1800s, however, Spain's position on the American colonies was weak, and when Bonaparte rose to power, they were forced to cede the territories that they had gained back to France in another treaty. Jefferson wanted to buy the Louisiana Territory for several reasons. One, he feared the French colonial empire. He also hoped that by opening the river, the gates of New Orleans would be open to American trade. Realizing this, Jefferson sent 2 ambassadors to Paris in secret, behind Congress's back. He sent James Monroe, an American statesman, and Robert Livingston, who he charged with negotiating the purchase of New Orleans. However, much to Jefferson's surprise, Bonaparte offered Jefferson the entire Louisiana Territory, in fear of conflict breaking out in the colonies while he was fighting Great Britain. He sold the territory because he was also unsure if he could defend Louisiana against the British. Therefore, selling it was a way of protecting the territory from British colonial ambitions. And then, on April of 1803, the territory was sold to America for 60 million francs and a small number of conditions, mainly the cancellation of French debt to America. This purchase was also met with some criticism, particularly by the Federalists, who feared that the Louisiana Purchase was a triumph of a plantation economy. They also feared that the purchase would affect relations with their greatest trading partner, Great Britain. Moreover, Jefferson had not consulted Congress before making the purchase. Although Jefferson's triumphs did not come without their shortcomings. To begin with, particularly in the Embargo Act. During Jefferson's presidency, conflicts between French and the English were rising, and he stated that he wanted to remain neutral within the conflict. However, he received word that British vessels were boarding onto American ships, quote-unquote, in search of deserters. At one point, a British vessel even fired upon an American one, which caused tensions to rise even further. Therefore, Jefferson had no choice but to ban British vessels from entering American ports. This was also known as the Embargo Act. Relationships between the French and the US also weakened. Therefore, Jefferson had no choice but to ban foreign trade outside of ports entirely. This was received very poorly as it greatly affected the American economy and their foreign relations. This in turn made Jefferson unpopular by the end of his second term. After his presidency, Jefferson retired to Monticello, an estate that he owned with his daughter, Martha, and their family. He dedicated the rest of his life to his family, working on his farm, reading, inventing contraptions, and observing meteorological phenomena. Jefferson founded the University of Charlottesville in 1815 and created a public research facility. Jefferson and John Adams were the last founding fathers to pass away. Fittingly, he died on Independence Day at the age of 83, 5 hours before John Adams passed away at the age of 90. Thomas Jefferson has always been a controversial figure in history, particularly with his perspective on slavery. Although he himself has publicly denounced slavery and has even attempted to write bills that denounce or even outright ban slavery, he receives criticism for ironically owning over 600 slaves across 3 plantations. Although he considered enslaving humans revolting, he also recognizes that slavery is an important factor in the workforce needed to produce cotton and tobacco, which he considered was the foundation for a moral society of America. In terms of Jefferson's topic on slavery, historians debate one of two things. Either he could have kept the slaves that he owned, due to the fact that he knew if he were to ever sell them, that others would treat them far worse than he did. Or 2, the fact that throughout his entire life he had always had a substantial amount of debt, combined with him, his families, and the family of his wife who had passed away, and he physically could not sell his slaves or else he would go into financial ruin. Either way, Thomas Jefferson's perspective on slavery remains a mystery to this day. Either way, Thomas Jefferson remains to be one of the most prominent and important people of American politics. His influence on American philosophy is great and can be seen throughout the war to the construction of the country itself.